The turkey was still warm. I knew this because I'd been up since 5 a.m., sprinkling it with salt and spices and turning the pan every 45 minutes. I'd driven my Honda around Millfield for 25 minutes at top speed so the mashed potatoes wouldn't get cold. I'd set the table with the lovely napkins Linda had bought me 3 days before Thanksgiving, the ones she only uses when entertaining guests. I even folded them and put them in small spice jars. No one asked me to, and no one noticed. Halfway through dinner, my mother walked around the table, put down her fork, and said, "You're a burden to me, and you always will be." My brother Garrett laughed, not a shy laugh, but a real one. "At least I make this family proud." My father glanced at the plate. I put down my fork, folded my napkin, pushed my chair back, grabbed my coat from the hook by the door, and left. No arguments, no tears, no meltdowns. Just the faint thud of the front door behind me. But none of them knew. I'd been paying for their roof for 8 years. What happened in the weeks following that dinner cost me everything. Welcome to the drama of quiet stories. I'm Sloane, 32, a certified public accountant from a small town in Pennsylvania. This story is about how my family treated me like an ATM for 8 years, how I became a burden on the Thanksgiving dinner table, and then how I learned what happens when an ATM disappears. If you hear stories about waking up and leaving, please share them in the comments and subscribe to the channel. I was 14 years old when I won the statewide math competition. First place. A gold-colored trophy with a small plaque bearing my name and year. I carried it home with me on the school bus, placing it on my lap the entire journey so it wouldn't shake. The smell of pepperoni wafted from the kitchen as I walked in through the front door. My mom had ordered 4 large pizzas from Gino's to celebrate Garrett's promotion to the junior football team. He was 17 at the time, and he sat on the back bench. Linda stood there cutting the pizzas and putting them on paper plates. "Your brother works hard. I know not everyone can join the team." I placed the cup on the table next to the pizza boxes. No one saw it. We had dinner and talked about Garrett's training program, his coach, and his new $120 shoes. I later found out that my father had gotten a credit card he couldn't pay off. After dinner, I washed the dishes. The cup stayed on the table for 3 days before I moved it to my room, a small room next to the laundry room, where the dryer rattled against the wall every night. The garage was the largest room in the house, and it had its own television and a lock on the door. I also had a window overlooking the neighbor's garage. That same month, I overheard Linda on the phone with Sister Oates Garrett saying she was going to get a college athletic scholarship. But he didn't. He was kicked off the team 3 months later for missing too many practices. I knew it. I didn't say anything. At 14, I'd learned something most people learn much later in life. Silence is either a weapon or a refuge. I still don't know which. I enrolled at Pennsylvania State University on a scholarship that covered 70% of my tuition. I worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, morning shifts at the university library and weekend shifts at a local tax office. I ate a lot of peanut butter sandwiches. I graduated in 4 years with a degree in accounting, debt-free. Garrett enrolled in a community college for 1 semester, then decided it wasn't for him and returned to his parents' basement to work. The business sold custom-made t-shirts online. It had been running for 4 months. The website was still technically inactive. There were no orders until 2017. 2 years after graduating from college, while working my first accounting job, I received a call from Linda. "Frank, my dad tore 3 ligaments in his lower back on a construction site. Workers' health insurance only covered the surgery, nothing else. We need help paying the bills, Sloane." I was earning $36,000 a year in my first job as an accountant. I started sending $800 a month, which was more than a quarter of my total salary. I ate instant noodles 5 nights a week. I usually skipped lunch. I bought my work clothes from a second-hand shop and mended them myself. Linda's voice dropped when I asked if Garrett was contributing anything. "Your brother's building something," she said. "All you have to do is work." That was my first check. I wrote it on the kitchen table in my apartment, where the heater was running at 2 in the morning. I signed my name, sealed the envelope, and dropped it into the letterbox in the corner. Over the next 8 years, I sent 312 more envelopes. 8 years is a long time to work as an accountant. In my 3rd year, I was hired by a small firm called Harper & Webb in Millfield as a senior accountant. In my 5th year, I was studying at night after filing other people's taxes and earned my Certified Public Accountant, CPA, designation, passing the exam on my first try. By the 8th year, my salary had risen to $58,000, and I had established an independent accounting firm that brought in an additional $15,000 a year. On the surface, I was living comfortably. In reality, I was paying the same amounts every month: $1,200 for the mortgage, an extra $340 for Frank's health insurance, and $180 for utility bills. Property taxes are paid twice a year. Over 8 years, they totaled around $186,000. I'm an accountant, so I know the exact figure and keep track of it. Meanwhile, Garrett's career path looks like a graveyard for owls. His first venture, a custom-made t-shirt business, failed within 4 months. His second, a cryptocurrency company, cost him $8,000 of Linda's savings. The first 3 projects, including the food truck idea, never progressed beyond a billboard on the basement wall. For 8 years, his financial contribution to the family was zero, never decreasing. But Linda's story remained unchanged. Garrett was determined to make it a success. Sloane was doing the math. That December, I went to the post office to send a tax extension to a client. On a table near the printing press lay a stack of Christmas cards. The one at the top was familiar. A picture of the Jurgens. 3 people, my mother, father, and brother, smiling in front of the fireplace I had paid for. I was a pastor, not a member. The church dinner was held in October, about a month before Thanksgiving. Linda was ready to give me 2 cakes, 1 apple, and 1 pecan, without me even asking. Nevertheless, I made them. When I entered the meeting room, Linda was holding a meeting near the cafe. She had her hand on Garrett's shoulder, as if presenting him with an award at the county fair. "Father Willin," she said, "have you met my son? He's an entrepreneur working on a very interesting project." Garrett pulled a glossy embossed business card from his back pocket for a company called Garrett Jurgens Enterprises. His 4th job was buying and selling vacant rural land. He didn't mention capital, land, or any plans other than a YouTube video he'd watched about real estate. Reverend Whelan nodded politely. "And your daughter? Sloane, right?" A woman, I think it was Mrs. Danner, asked at the dessert table. "Oh, Sloane, she's studying accounting, she's fine." "Okay," she said, like someone describing the weather on a day no one remembers. I stood by the salad table with my 2 bags and an empty paper plate. I took the cupcakes away, grabbed my bag, and walked to the parking lot. No one noticed I was gone. On my way home, I stopped at Wawa on 30th Street and bought a medium-sized black coffee with 2 spoons of sugar. I sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't think. I did something I've done my whole life. I reconsidered things. Every few years, an accountant has to review the books and wonder if the long-term burden is still worth it. I had to start thinking. Thanksgiving breakfast, 5 o'clock in the morning. I stood in my apartment kitchen with a 20-pound turkey beside me, which I had soaked overnight in a 5-gallon bucket. I had made everything myself: buttered mashed potatoes, a green bean casserole with fresh mushrooms, and a cranberry sauce. I made myself because Linda once said the canned kind tasted like hospital jam. At 11 a.m., my car smelled like a restaurant. I drove for 25 minutes to 814 Maple Drive, carrying 6 boxes up the stairs in 3 trips, and entered with the key I'd kept since my college days. The house was quiet. Frank was watching a football game calmly on the sofa with a heating pad on his back. Linda was getting dressed. Garrett was still asleep in the basement. I set the table, cleaned the kitchen surfaces, and adjusted the thermostat. I could do it. I paid the electricity bill. I laid out napkins and placed them next to each dish. I checked the stove temperature again. At exactly 2 p.m., Garrett came upstairs, his hair untangled, his cap on, and his sweatpants on, and sat down in a chair. "When is dinner?" Linda appeared behind him and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Garrett, darling, sit down. You must be tired." He was asleep 90 seconds ago. I saw him sitting in the chair I had just cleaned. No one thanked me. No one asked if I needed help. No one said a word. In accounting, there's a term used to describe a situation where two numbers are identical, but they aren't. It's inconsistent. Both entries, the debit and the credit, are recorded in the books, but something is wrong. Until it's discovered, the entire accounting is flawed. And as I stood in that kitchen, spoon in hand, watching my family gather around the food I had prepared and paid for, I understood the meaning of this term for the first time as a professional. Linda raised her wine glass toward the counter. I want to express my gratitude to Garrett. He's always been a source of pride for our family. Garrett has shown great humility. Thank you, Mom. Actually, I'm working on a big project. I'm focusing on some real estate on 9th Street. Real estate is where you invest smart money. He said this while eating roast turkey, sitting in the house where I'd paid off the mortgage. Frank was chewing slowly, his eyes fixed on his plate. Linda turned to me. Sloane, why should you be grateful? I opened my mouth and said, I am grateful. You're just a burden. You always have been. He said it like mashed potatoes needed more salt. Actually, it sounded like something everyone knew, but usually no one said out loud. Garrett laughed. It wasn't a scared laugh, like covering one's mouth. A real laugh. A justified laugh. At least I make this family proud. Frank put down his fork. He didn't raise his head. He didn't say a word. He stopped chewing. I looked at the napkin on my lap. I looked at the napkin I'd fanned out 2 hours earlier. I put my fork down. To the left. Not to the right. As if I were putting it back in its place after I'd finished and never going back for it. I folded the napkin once and placed it next to my plate, pushed my chair back, got up, walked to the front door, and took my coat off the hanger, a gray wool coat I'd bought at Goodwill in Lancaster for $12. Where are you going? Linda's voice sounded more annoyed than worried. Dinner wasn't over yet. I didn't answer. I went out, closed the door behind me, and walked to my car. The engine started on the first try. I pulled Frank's old truck out of the yard. It had a flat tire that no one had ever fixed. I drove home for 25 minutes in complete silence. No radio, no phone, no tears. Just the road, the darkness, and the crackling of the fireplace. It was the last Thanksgiving I'd ever spent in that house. 2 weeks later, I sat on the couch and opened the bank app. I'd set up the payment 3 years earlier. $1,200 for the mortgage on the 1st of each month. $340 for electricity and gas on the 15th, and $180 for Frank's supplemental health insurance. 3 automatic transfers, 3 clicks to cancel. I clicked the first. Confirm? Yes. The second. Confirm? Yes. The third. Yes. It took me less than a minute. 8 years of financial obligations ended with 3 clicks and an OK sign. I closed the app and placed my phone on the coffee table. For the first time in years, my checking account balance was the same at the end of the month. On the 12th, my phone rang. Dad. Sloane, mortgage? The bank sent a letter. It says the payment is late, and there's a penalty. His voice had that cautious tone he uses when he knows Linda is standing and doesn't want to trip over a cord. Why didn't he pay off the mortgage? Ask your precious daughter. Silence. I heard the TV in the background, a game show with a bell. Sloane, you can't just say, I can, and I do. I hung up. I lay back on the couch and stared at the ceiling. My apartment was small, 410 square feet if you count the bathroom. But it was mine. The lease was in my name. The electricity was in my name. The Wi-Fi, the tenant's insurance, even the welcome rug. Everything was mine. I paid for everything in this room with my own money. And for the first time in 8 years, I won't send a single dollar to a house where my name isn't even on a Christmas card. 8 years, 312 checks, not a single thank you from my family. When I finally stopped, the first call wasn't to check on me but to inquire about a loan. If you're the one managing things efficiently while others are borrowing, you know exactly what it means to be silent on the phone. Stay with me. Because what I discovered later changed everything. Linda's counterattack began 3 days later. She didn't call me, but she called everyone. Aunt Carol in Allentown, the home of one of her cousins in Scranton, Mrs. Danner from the church, the wife of the Reverend Wyland, and a cashier at the IGA store whom our family had known for 20 years. The narrative was simple, practical, and deeply moving. Sloane had left her family. Her father was disabled, and her mother had no income. Sloane cut them off. There was no context. Nothing was mentioned about her 8 years in the Czech Republic. Nothing was mentioned about the word pregnancy at Thanksgiving dinner. It was simply the story Linda wanted to tell. My phone was flooded with voicemails, 4 messages a day, sometimes 5, kill your father, the church is praying for us, how dare you do that to your mother. I listened to them all only once. I opened a spreadsheet. Columns for date, caller, time, summary, and emotional log. I formatted each message as a transaction. Actually, no comment. Then I deleted the voicemail. I didn't call anyone. On the 5th day, Garrett called. For the first time in 3 years. His voice was harsh, like someone holding a grudge on their phone. He said, "You need to come home and fix everything." "Fix what? Everything. Mom's going crazy. Dad can't sleep. The bank's calling me." "Garrett, it sounds like a family issue." "Are you family?" "Am I?" "Because Mom told me I was a burden on her at Thanksgiving." You laughed. Dad didn't say anything. It doesn't seem like a family thing to me. He hung up. I added the call to my spreadsheet. December 14th, 11:47 a.m. It lasted about 2 minutes. Hostile voice. Inquisitive tone. I get my credit report every 3 months. It wasn't just a figment of my imagination, it was a professional habit. When I was a certified public accountant, my credit history was part of my qualifications. Clients trusted their records, and lenders trusted my credit score. I checked mine in the second week of January. Equifax was installed on my laptop screen in my apartment. I scanned the usual numbers: student loan payments, auto loan payments. My credit card usage was at 9%, so I left. I opened a new account. The mortgage payment. The $47,000 mortgage was on a house at 814 Maple Drive, Millfield, Pennsylvania. It had been opened 4 months prior. My name was listed as Sloane A. Juergens. I had never signed a mortgage in my life. I had never approved a loan. I had never been to a bank, spoken to a loan officer, or stood before a notary public. But here it is. My name, my social security number, my credit history. I had a second mortgage on a house I didn't own, on one mortgage. My credit score dropped 38 points. I sat down. My hands were still. I'm an accountant. I don't mind numbers when they're wrong. Quite the opposite, when they're wrong. I took a screenshot and downloaded the entire report as a PDF. Then I created a new folder on my desktop and named it 814 Maple. I saved the file and opened a new spreadsheet. Column A, date. Column B, source. Column C, result. Column D, action taken. I wrote the first entry, January 12th, Equifax credit report. Unapproved home loan, $47,000, 814 Maple Avenue. I saved a screenshot and archived it as a PDF. Someone had used my name, signature, and loan information. There was only one address associated with the loan. The next morning, I called Valley First Credit Union. The loan officer, a woman named Janet, was polite and helpful. "Ms. Juergens, I can prepare the application for you, but first I need to verify your identity." I gave her everything: my social security number, my date of birth, and my mother's maiden name. She confirmed that I was the person I had named. Janet said, "The application was submitted in person and notarized by a local notary. I will mail you a copy in 5 to 7 business days." I said it would be great. 5 days later, a package arrived from Manila. I spread the papers out on the kitchen table, switched on the reading lamp I use for my freelance work, and flipped through the pages. The application was complete. It had been filled out by someone who knew me well. The name of my employer, my income, and my address. The address listed was 814 Maple Avenue, not my apartment. The signature was on page 11. At first glance, it looked almost identical, but I'm the kind of person who signs tax returns and client letters 100 times a month. I know my handwriting like a carpenter knows the grain of wood. Sloane's S is right-handed, mine is left-handed. Always. Below the signature is the notary's seal, Darren Holt, Notary Public, Pennsylvania. Darren Holt. I knew that name. He was a classmate of Garrett's at Millfield High School. They played together on the reserve football team from which Garrett was kicked out. Darren had a notary office on Main Street, next to the hardware store. I put the document aside, picked up the phone, and called my boss, Rita Oakes. Rita, I need a lawyer, not a tax lawyer, a criminal lawyer. Rita paused, then said, "It's about your family, isn't it? It's about a forged signature on a $47,000 loan. I'll call you tonight." Alan Marsh had an office in Lancaster, 35 minutes east. He was in his 50s, with graying hair at the temples, a desk covered in ledgers, and a mug labeled Proceedings. Rita has known him for 15 years. I sat in front of him with my mortgage application, my credit report, my real signature on it, and my certified accountant's license. He studied it for 10 minutes without saying a word. Then he walked away. "Let's get this over with. Fraud, identity theft, bank fraud. If you want to file a lawsuit, it's a federal case." "What about the loan itself?" "You have to file an identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission, contest the account with all 3 credit bureaus, and then the bank will start an investigation. The loan will be flagged. It takes 60 to 90 days to resolve the issue. What about the house? Just wait. If the second loan is fraudulent, the bank will cancel it. But the first mortgage, which I paid off, if it wasn't paid, the property would be foreclosed on. It would be paid off. I stopped making the payments." Alan looked at me, not with condemnation, but with the look of someone who knows math. "Then the house would be put up for auction, maybe in 6 months." I shook my head. That day, I filed an identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission from my laptop in my apartment. I froze my credit history with all 3 credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I wrote a letter of objection, printed it, signed it with my real signature, and mailed it to Valley First Credit Union by registered mail. Then I made dinner, a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup, and sat on the couch and ate it in silence. 60 to 90 days. I waited 32 years. Alan's investigation moved faster than I expected. Vail was initially complicit. They had their own obligations to attend to, and the falsified notary statement was a problem for them as well. Within 3 weeks, the bank had $47,000. It was transferred from the loan account to a business current account at another bank, registered to G&H Ventures, LLC. G. Legart, H. Lee Holt, Darren Holt, and Notary Partners. I sent him the distribution records. I read all the financial documents written in pencil on yellow legal paper, slowly at the kitchen table. An $18,000 down payment had been made for a vacant lot in rural Berks County, which had since lost 40% of its value due to a rejected redevelopment application. $22,000 was sent to a Ford F-150 truck registered in Garrett's name, which was listed as a company vehicle in the LLC's records. The remaining $7,000 was allocated for operating expenses. Alan obtained bank statements for these operating expenses. The expenses included 2 trips to Las Vegas, airfare, and hotel accommodations. They also included 6 dinners at Philadelphia restaurants costing less than $100 each, a video game console with 3 controllers, and a monthly membership to a cigar club. My brother used my name to steal $47,000 and spend it on worthless land, a truck to take me to the gas station, and vacations I'll never take. I didn't sleep at the table. I didn't cry. I picked up my pen and added each item to the spreadsheet. Column A, item. Column B, amount. Column C, source. Column D, status. After I finished, I closed my laptop and washed my coffee cup. My brother took everything that had my name on it, and my mother called it the pride of the family. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, with my mortgage application under the reading light. My certified public accountant, CPA, license lay beside it. 2 signatures, 2 versions of my name, written in 2 different handwritings. The signature on my will was mine. Clean, neat, and the prisoner wrote on the left as I had learned spelling from Mrs. Patterson in the 3rd grade at Millfield Primary School. The signature on the arrest warrant was Garrett's. The letters were written on the right. The space was limited, but the S was slanted to the right. This was a common mistake. like seeing a signature 100 times and not recognizing the handwriting. I remembered 312 checks I had mailed over the past 8 years. Every single one bore my actual signature, written willingly, without thanks, and without any notice. No one in my family studied those signatures. No one held any of them up to the light. No one framed them or kept them. They changed them and forgot about them. But this fake signature of mine was important to them for the first time. They weren't the real ones. They weren't the ones who turned on the lights, or who plastered the ceiling, or whose frank insurance was valid. Fake. He paid $47,000 for a truck in Las Vegas. That was the signature required. I stared at the two names engraved on the headlights for a long time. A promissory note for $47,000. I folded the application and put it back in the envelope, then placed it in file 814 Maple, and put the file in my desk drawer. Then I turned off the light, brushed my teeth, and went to bed. I didn't dream. I do dream sometimes. But the next morning, at 5:15, I felt a clarity of mind I hadn't felt in years. No anger, no sadness, no math. Rita and I were sitting in a corner of Calhoun's on High Street. She was eating a club sandwich. I had coffee and chicken noodle soup. She asked me, "What are you going to do?" I replied, "I'm going to get the system working. A report has been filed with the Federal Trade Commission. The credit bureaus are investigating. Alan is running the bank, and my job is done." She asked, "What job is done?" I answered, "Everything. The checks, the vacations, the phone calls, the voicemails from people who think I owe my parents my whole life." I wrote that down. I canceled my car payment since Thanksgiving. The credit freeze went into effect. I filed a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. I changed the locks on the apartment, not because I thought Garrett was coming, but because this is the old lock Frank installed when I first moved here, and I don't want anything in my life to affect my family. I kept sending voice messages to the files folder, not to torture myself, but because each message served as a document, a template, a test, if I needed it. Rita stirred her iced tea. "What about the house?" "The house is going bankrupt. It's going to be auctioned off." "So what?" I looked at her. She looked at me. Rita is a 54-year-old woman. Harper and Webb built it from a folding table in the garage. She knew exactly what it meant to build from scratch in front of people who expected failure. "My mother was right about one thing," I said. "I was a burden. Not like she said, but I was the burden carrying everything, and I let her down." Rita nodded slowly. She didn't say, "Okay," or "I'm proud of you." She said, "I'm finishing up at the store. We have 3 new customers this week." I sat in that restaurant with my manager and said, "We're done," out loud for the first time. I wasn't angry, I wasn't being dramatic, I was just done. And that's what happens when you're done. You don't feel free immediately. It feels like you're in free fall, but you quickly realize you're not. You no longer care about other people. If that word means anything to you now, keep searching. My phone rang at 11:47 on Tuesday night. I was about to give up, but it was Frank. And Frank doesn't call so late unless Linda is asleep. "Sloane." His voice was low. The basement was low, or perhaps he'd gone out onto the porch. I could hear the wind. "I know you're angry," he said. "I know why." I didn't say a word. I should have said something at that table. I should have said something a long time ago. I'm still silent. The silence isn't his. It's mine. "Your mother should have filled it. She had a hard life after you were born. She quit her job at the hardware store. She was the best saleswoman in the area, but she quit because we couldn't afford to care for 2 children. She was never satisfied. That's her story, Dad, not mine." "I know." Another silence. This time it was longer. The wind kept blowing from the other side. He left. "I know you deserve better than tonight, better than anything." I waited. "But you can't leave the house, Sloane. This is all we have." There was the question, the only reason for the call. Not to apologize. Not really. Not to get enough money to get by. He said the right words, but he granted the wrong request. "Good night, Dad." "Sloane." "Good night." I hung up, placed the phone on the table in front of me, pulled the covers up, and looked up at the ceiling. Before he could speak, in that brief moment between "I know" and "but," I heard something I'd never heard him say before. Maybe it was regret, Maybe it was the sound of the wind. Before the call ended, he said, "Don't tell your mother I called." He liked that, and I believe him, but he preferred silence. 60 days after Thanksgiving, Valley First Credit Union sent a notice of default to 814 Maple Drive. It took 90 days to rectify the situation, or the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings. Linda didn't tell me directly, but rather through 11 voicemails in one day. The situation was entirely predictable. 9 a.m. Sloane, please call me. I received a message from the bank. 10:15 a.m. This is serious. Your father is very upset. 11:30 a.m. You're tearing this family apart. 1 p.m. God will hold you accountable for this, Sloane. He sees everything. 3:45, his voice trembling. If I hadn't found you. I listened. I recorded the call. I deleted it. Same graph, same bars, same consistent result. Date, February 2nd. Caller, Linda Jurgen. Number of messages, 11. Emotional trajectory, from prayer to accusation to theology to grief. But there was another call that caught my attention that day. Garrett. His voice was different. It was angry, neither firm nor trembling. "Hey," he said, "about the second mortgage on his house with Valley First Bank. Maybe we should talk about that." I immediately understood the tremor in his voice. Garrett wasn't afraid of losing his house. He was afraid of what the bank would discover when he took out the second mortgage. My forged signature. If the bank examines it, they'll find counterfeit money. If they find counterfeit money, they'll find Darren Holt's forged notarization. If they find Darren, they'll find G&H Ventures. If they find G&H Ventures, they'll know where the $47,000 went. Las Vegas, a truck, a gaming console. Talk to Garrett through your lawyer. I hung up. He didn't call back for 6 weeks. January turned into February, and something strange happened. My life settled down. It wasn't empty, it just settled down. That kind of stability that comes when you stop carrying burdens I know so well. When I moved into a house I hadn't been living in for $1,720 a month, my checking account wasn't the same anymore. It grew. I opened an investment account. A simple Vanguard index fund. Nothing special. I bought a real sofa to replace the Goodwill sofa I had from my first apartment. The one with the spring coming out of the left cushion. I signed up for a yoga class at the community center in Lancaster, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I'd never done yoga before. It turned out I loved it. Rita introduced me to 3 new accounting clients, all small businesses in the area. My freelance income increased by $22,000 a year, and I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I filed a limited liability company in Pennsylvania, Jurgens and Associates Consulting. The filing fee was $125. When the certificate of incorporation arrived in the mail, I framed it and hung it on the wall above my desk. It was the first document to bear my name. In a way, it was the first picture of my family. Meanwhile, 25 minutes west, the outline of our house at 814 Maple Street was beginning to appear. The lawn had grown longer because Frank could no longer push the mower on his back, and Garrett said he was too busy with his work. The company was a limited liability company, and its bank account was empty. The utility company cut off service for a week before Frank paid the bill with his own check. The porch light was broken. The flagpole by the door hung sideways with a missing nail. No one had fixed it. Pauline Oates met me at Wawa's one Saturday morning in late February. I was buying coffee and bananas. That was what I usually ate before going to the market. She was a 72-year-old woman, 180 centimeters tall, who had lived near Jurgen's house for 31 years. She had watched me grow up. "My dear," she said, placing her hand on my arm near the dairy shop, "I told your mother that you had left them. I told her that you didn't care about them anymore." I stirred the coffee. I heard it. "But I saw you, Sloane. You walked down that street every Saturday morning for years, carrying bags of groceries. I saw you mowing the lawn in July when it was 90 degrees because your father couldn't stand up straight. I saw you holding the turkey out onto the porch on Thanksgiving because you were 23. I know what you did to that family." She clapped her hands. "I know what they did to you." I didn't answer right away, not because I was too excited, but because I was recalculating. Pauline Oates was the only one who didn't notice. The word got around. Because I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't told anyone except Rita and Alan. But because Millfield has a population of 4,000, and because memories last a long time, people connect the dots. The girl who brought a cake to every party, who donated to every charity event, who secretly paid the church bill for 3 years, not only had she left her family, but the Reverend Whelan had called her the following Sunday. Is there something you're hiding from us about Sloane? Linda. She's selfish, a pastor, the girl who donated to every bakery in the church for 10 years? Silence. Meanwhile, Darren Holt receives a registered letter from the Pennsylvania State Department. The notary's office is reviewing the case. A Federal Trade Commission report led to an investigation of the bank, and the bank, in turn, filed a report against the notary. Darren called Garrett that afternoon. I've finished covering your story. Find out for yourself. In late March, the First Valley Credit Union had filed a foreclosure notice with the judge's office. The property was to be auctioned within 30 days. The letter arrived at Maple Drive on Wednesday at 8:14 a.m. Linda read it at the kitchen table and set it aside without saying a word. A few months later, Frank told me she'd sat in the same chair for 2 hours without moving. The house. 4 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, built in 1987, the year Frank and Linda married. The kitchen where Linda baked Garrett's birthday cakes, always chocolate, always with his name on them in blue frosting. The living room where the Christmas photo is taken every year. 3 people, 4 at most. The market value is estimated at around $180,000. The first mortgage is $94,000. The second mortgage payment, a result of Garrett's fraud, is $47,000. The accounts are bad and getting worse. Linda called me for the last time. No, she didn't quote any religious verses. She didn't make any accusations, just a voice I'd never heard from her before. Flat, small, empty. Please. I can't help you, Mum. I mean, you can't. I can't. You proved it on Thanksgiving. She was silent for a long time. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking in the background, like a chicken perched on the wall since I was 6. She said, "You'll regret this." But her voice was devoid of any emotion. She spoke because she had nothing else to say. She hung up. She placed the phone on the kitchen table. She glanced at the company's limited certificate of incorporation hanging on the wall. Juergens and Partners Consulting. I had 30 days. I met Alan Marsh at his office in Lancaster on Thursday afternoon. I said, "A preliminary offer. Who can make an offer? Anyone. Individuals, limited liability companies, corporations, cash or certified check. It's a public offer. Can my limited liability company make an offer?" He put his pen down. Juergens and Partners. Consulting? Yes. I've been considering this for a while. There are no legal restrictions. A limited liability company is a separate entity. It has its own tax identification number, its own bank account, and its own operating agreement. Having a last name similar to previous owners is not grounds for disqualification. What is the minimum bid? He was conducting a similar sale on his computer. Foreclosed properties in rural Pennsylvania sell for between 60 and 70 cents on the dollar, or between $110,000 and $125,000. I opened my laptop on the table and showed her my accounts. My personal savings were $89,000, the result of 8 years of living on a modest income and steady investments. My business account with a limited liability company held $45,000, the freelance income I'd been investing in the company since its inception. Rita said she could pay me my year-end bonus of $8,000 up front. My total liquid assets were $142,000. Alan looked at the numbers, then at me. "You can do that too. I know. I've been doing math since Thanksgiving." He leaned forward. "When you buy that house, what will you do with it if you buy it?" Something my mother never did. "What is it?" "I'll make it a welcoming place for people." Then he picked up the pen again. "I'll register the credit card as a bidder. You'll need a bank check on the day of the auction. I'll collect it." We shook hands. It was the most professional handshake of my life, and at the same time, incredibly intimate. Garrett came to my apartment on Sunday night. He didn't call or text. He slammed the door shut just enough to break the lock. I unzipped it. I saw his face through the 3-inch opening. Unshaven, with bloodshot eyes, and wearing the same hat he wore on Thanksgiving. You need to file a report with the Federal Trade Commission. No greeting, no introduction, just charges. If they investigate, I'm going to jail, Sloane. You committed identity theft and bank fraud. These are federal charges, Garrett. I'm not your problem. I'm your brother. You're the stranger who broke my parents up. He shifted his weight, trying a different perspective. As usual. Twisted, charming. It worked with Linda. It didn't work with me. I'm going to get every penny back. It just needs time. With what? Your food truck that hasn't even launched yet? Your crypto wallet? Lautenberg County that lost 40% of its value? He clenched his jaw. The beauty was gone. What was inferior to it would remain inferior. A man who thought he owed something he didn't deserve said calmly, "If you don't let him, I'll tell everyone that you're the reason my parents lost their home. They're thinking about the future. My mom's been telling this story for weeks." He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. He didn't say a word. I looked at him through the zipper of his pants. My brother, 3 years older than me, 3 inches taller, and older than me in every way. "Good morning, Garrett." I closed the door, opened it, zipped up the zipper, and went back to the couch, where I sat down and picked up the book I'd been reading. I found a used copy of a financial planning guide at the library's secondhand bookstore. I heard him standing behind me in the hall for another 30 seconds before his footsteps disappeared up the stairs. I skipped Sunday Mass at 8 to get away from my family. Linda was there at 10. I thought that was enough. That wasn't the case. On the first Sunday in April, I entered the prayer hall at 7:55 and found Linda in the third row with 2 church elders, Harold Gregg and Martha Benton. They were waiting for me. "Sloane," Harold said. He was a man in his 70s, a retired teacher with kind eyes and a rich personality. "We asked your mother to come because we believe in reconciling families." I finished by saying, "The Bible says, honor your father and mother." I know the verse. Linda folded her arms, raised her chin, and sat in the posture of a woman who thought she had mastered the law. The Bible says, "Fathers, do not make your children angry." Ephesians 6:4. I placed my bag on the chair, and I think he says, "Don't steal." My brother forged my signature on an official document, a $47,000 bond. My name is Heather Merrill, and I realized how important my family was to me when I was 33. It happened at my brother's engagement party in front of 60 guests. Nolan raised his glass, looked directly at me, and addressed the audience with a sympathetic gaze. Then he leaned down and pulled me to the floor from the backrests of my wheelchair. My father stood beside me and called me the biggest loser in the family. My mother turned away, as if it were something she had to deal with, just as she had with my face. But here's what neither of them knew. For 2 years, I'd been aware of something they couldn't convince me to keep quiet about. None of us had imagined that in 15 minutes, 5 officers would walk through those doors, and silence would fall over the entire room. Welcome to the world of silent drama, where ordinary women face difficult families, and they face them with determination, not shouting. If you believe in the power of women, you're in the right place. Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe. Let me take you back 2 years, to the image my family wants everyone to believe about me. I now live alone in a single-story apartment, about 25 minutes from the house where I grew up. Everything is close by. I drive my own car, a manual sedan, and work from my kitchen table conducting legal research and preparing real estate documents for 2 small businesses. I am a paralegal. This word is important later, so hold on tight. People hear the wheelchair and ask me to speak softly, and I stopped correcting them because it was draining the energy I was putting into my work. My family didn't ask me to speak softly. They would answer the phone, and when they did, it was usually to remind me not to dwell on the past. My mother said, "We won't dig her up again," as if we had agreed never to, as if she were a corpse we had buried together long ago. They called it a single-car accident. The report stated it was a single-car accident. But the whole town called it the tragic story of the Merrill girl who lost control of her car on Country Road 12. Every time I close my eyes, I remember the car lights. They weren't my car lights. If no one had reported it, They would have been the lights of a truck that had come right up close. I pressed my hand against the cold aluminum of the armrests and tried to hold on to that memory. Even my family had promised him that. They called it confusion. I started calling it a test. Here's the story everyone agrees on. 2 years ago, on a rainy October night, I was driving home from work when I lost control of my car and veered off Highway 12. The car flipped. I was in a coma for 9 days. When I woke up, my spine was broken at chest level, and the official accident report had already been written and signed without my knowledge. Before I could write a single sentence, the accident report was closed. My father spoke to the officer he'd been playing cards with on Thursday. My mother told the hospital social worker that I'd always been a nervous driver. The account was recorded before I'd even lifted my head from the pillow. I tried to tell them about the car. I tried more than once. My brother Nolan sat by my bed, took my hand, and said in his warm voice, "Hey, you're stressing yourself out. There's no car." Months after this, and after many Thanksgivings, as I said, until someone changed the subject, the family found a better way to deal with me. They decided I wasn't flustered, that I was putting on an act. She was pretending to be bad. At one point, I heard my father say to my uncle, "I'm not quiet enough." Some people like to draw attention to themselves. I sat in the other room and listened to my father turn his back to the dress. I didn't say a word. I'd learned early on that the hardest thing was paper. My father was Merrill Howling, and Merrill Howling was my father. He built a house out of a truck and a second mortgage when I was a child. Growing up, there were 11 trucks along a 1-mile stretch of highway, and my father was the closest thing to a human being. He always said that the company was a real family, and we were all shareholders. Nolan was the heir. He was elected at a difficult time. My brother had spent the last few years arranging his business license, made the long journey himself, then joined the shipping company's board of directors, and one day ran the entire company. At the time of the disaster, the company was pursuing the largest contract in its history, a regional distribution deal that would double its fleet. My father wanted that contract just as much as the other men wanted to be remembered. He sighed. Anything that threatened the company would jeopardize the only legacy he believed in. He wasn't hurt when his daughter talked about the trucks because she wasn't there. He felt burdened. He would look at me across the dinner table, his eyes wide with surprise. And I knew he was counting on me like he was counting on the wrong burden. In my family, the company has a say in everything, and the company decided that what happened to me on County Route 12 was a done deal. The only thing that was wrong was me. I let them believe I'd given up trying for 2 years. It's amazing what people say when they're sure you've stopped listening. The wedding took place in the spring. Nolan asked Bree Calloway for her hand in marriage. The kind teacher, who looked a little apprehensive, looked at him as if she were looking at someone she had decided to trust completely. The whole family was overjoyed. Suddenly, menus, tables, and a cottage for rent on Lake Carlton appeared, and my mother devised a plan to pretend I was fine. I watched from afar, taking in most of the family's belongings, now spread out on the edge of the table, while the plan unfolded before my eyes. No one asked my opinion about the place. No one asked if the country house had an entrance, but they didn't ask much. When I mentioned it, my mother held out her hand. "Well, dear, guess what? Don't complicate things." I stood there, my hand on the cold aluminum armrest, my face impassive, waiting, because I knew my silence would anger them more than my anger. Then my mother said something she'd been keeping to herself for 2 years. She was folding a napkin, and she didn't even look at me. She said, "We just want something happy. After I've done everything for this family, after I've put them through all of this, I'm the one who's going to help them through this, and I'm going to help them somehow." I didn't argue. The problem was the door I'd stopped going through. Instead, I went home that night, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the letter I'd received that week from the insurance company. It was a betrayal, but within it emerged the first glimmer of hope I'd seen in 2 years. The insurance company refused to cover the cost of the equipment I needed, a better wheelchair, and the rejection letter stated that I had the right to appeal. The letter explained the appeal process and that I was entitled to request my complete file, which I filled out. Medical records, invoices, and any accident documents related to the lawsuit. I read that paragraph 4 times. I was told that the past 2 years were closed and restricted and that I had no say in them. And here was a ready-made letter from an anonymous insurance company reminding me that my personal information was my own. As a paralegal, I knew exactly what to ask and who to answer. The next morning, I started filing claims. I looked through the hospital records and the payment details. Then, because something inside me had stopped seeing those headlights, I looked through the entire accident file at the dealership. I didn't just rely on the one-page summary my dad's friend had given me. I looked through everything, every single file. I explained it to the client as I would have explained it to him, calmly, clearly, and without reservation. I didn't tell my family. There was no need. I thought I was in trouble. They managed to resolve the issue. The insurance company gave me something I had never asked for, a letter. Genuine handwriting, signed and dated, the kind that wouldn't change the story even if someone asked for a roll of paper on a Thursday. I mailed the questions, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something in my chest that wasn't sadness. It was one-sided patience. It took my father 3 weeks to understand, because small towns flood. Someone at the county clerk's office told someone at the church that Meryl's daughter was getting her emergency file. That Sunday night, my father found out. He didn't yell. My father never yells. Yelling is for men who have lost control of the situation. He put his fork down, looked at me, and asked what I was doing. I appealed the insurance company's rejection. That was it. But it didn't end there. He kept scrutinizing it. I told him I had the right to see my medical records. My mother's voice rose. Why do you want to go through this again? Why put yourself through this? She replied, for us. Then my father uttered that sentence that would echo in my ears for the next 2 months, in his voice, in my mother's voice, in my head even when I was suffering from insomnia. He leaned back, folded his arms, and spoke softly, as if speaking with wisdom. He left it to his family. To his family. As if family were something fragile, I began to threaten him, not a wall hanging around my neck for 2 years. I looked around at that table, at the people who had signed documents on my unconscious body, and realized something clear and cold. They didn't ask me to be honest. They didn't ask me to shut up. That's not the same question. I said, okay. I said it calmly so they would believe me. Then I drove home in the dark for 25 minutes and looked in my mailbox. The first letter had arrived. I want to pause here for a moment because I know some of you are reading this for a reason. Someone in your life has told you to stop remembering something that happened to you. If that person is you, listen. Write it down. Keep the documentation. Don't argue with those who want you to be wrong, because you'll never win that argument, and you're not expected to. Comment with, I remember, to confirm you're still here. Then go back to the original post. This was the accident report, the full version. I read it slowly, as if I were reading with a pen. Each time I read it, my hand felt strangely cold. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. There wasn't a single part that would have prevented a second vehicle. Nothing. In a serious injury accident, you would expect the investigator to explain this, to record the skidding, the debris, the point of impact, and to write, there is no evidence of a second vehicle. If you believe this, simply ignore this report. Something else is missing. The Emergency Medical Services dispatch log, filled out by the paramedics at the scene, is not included. This log accurately records what they saw before anyone edited the story. The accident report and the Emergency Medical Services dispatch log are 2 separate documents, written by 2 different people. My father's friend wrote a question Thursday night, and the paramedics wrote another. I was sitting at the kitchen table in the middle of the night, staring at the empty space where a second ambulance was supposed to enter or exit. I picked up my pen and wrote a new question. This time, as the paramedics themselves said, getting a list of people who would be arriving at the emergency room immediately wasn't like ordering a pizza. There are privacy laws, data controllers, and application forms that must be submitted to the appropriate office, or they'll sit in a box for a month. I know all this, and that's the only place where my family's negative view of me is wrong. They thought my job had made me withdrawn and isolated, but my job has made me patient and meticulous, and patience and meticulousness are exactly what you need to navigate the labyrinth of bureaucracy. So I submitted the application correctly. I followed up weekly and waited. While I waited, I inquired cautiously, the way one asks when they don't want the municipality to start talking. That's how I met Marianne Voss. Marianne had been an emergency room nurse for 19 years before retiring. When I finished my trip in October of that year, she was working the night shift. I invited her for coffee. I didn't mislead her. I asked her what she remembered about the rollover accident on Country Road 122 last fall. She took a long time to make her coffee. Finally, she said, "I remember it. I remember thinking that the damage to the car she'd just been driving wasn't worth it." I asked her what she meant. She nodded slowly. "It was a while ago, but it was about the driver. I wrote it down. That should have been on the list. Again, it was a to-do list, a document no one had attached to my file. I thanked Marian, drove home, and that night I didn't rest my hands on the armrests to rack my brain. I did that because, for the first time, my memory was studying me. Marian gave me another name before we had even finished our coffee. That night, an old man stood there. He always stood by the ditch. He would tell the policeman whenever he saw a car. His name was Walt Whitfield. He was 81 years old, and he was pleased that I had called him in a sharp, melancholic tone. I went to see him on Tuesday. He made me a light cup of coffee and told me the whole story without me having to ask him twice. As he was driving home from his sister's house, crossing the slope on Country Road 12, he saw a small truck half-parked on the side of the road, its lights off, and my car overturned in a ditch behind it. When the truck stopped, the car had disappeared. It was dark. I jotted down most of the license plate number and gave it to the young policeman who was there. He never heard another word about it. No one followed up. No one contacted him. He assumed the police, like any decent person, had taken care of it. I sat in Walt Whitfield's kitchen, feeling as though 2 years of confusing phone calls were raining down on me. A man I'd never seen before had stood in the well and seen exactly what I had seen. A truck, a real truck that someone had drawn and someone else had erased. I asked Walt if he was prepared to tell the real person everything publicly. He nodded. "Madam," he said, "I've waited 2 years for someone to ask me." My father met me at my apartment a week later. He never came to my apartment. He seemed upset that there was no staircase, but he stood by the door, never sat down. "You went to see Walt Whitfield," he said. Life in the city had returned to normal. I didn't deny it. I asked him why he was so bothered when there was nothing available. Only then did the real reason come out. Of all the things being said about recovery and the family, do you have any idea what that will do to the company? He said the situation deteriorated rapidly. "We're very close to finalizing the distribution deal. Very close. You'll take the police back 2 years of chaos. You'll tarnish the family's reputation, and that deal will go through. 11 directors. Heather, your cousin Pete's business, the whole garden. That's all there is to it." That was the wall I felt around my neck for 2 years. Not sadness, not shame, but a promise. My father saw me as a burden, and he repeated it, like the beating of the family drums. But now I fully understood what he meant. He left it to his family. He meant it to his community. He told me so himself. I looked at my father, the man I'd loved all my life, and the last vestiges of tenderness within me turned to calm and rationality. He hadn't come to protect me. He'd come to protect a contract that was more valuable than the truth about his daughter's backbone. I said, "Okay, Dad," closed the door, and called the lawyer. My mother came home 2 days after Dad left, and she was different. She wasn't leading the party. She wasn't leading anything. She sat on my sofa with her purse on her lap, like a woman in a lounge. She stared at her hands for a while. Some nights she would start and stop, then try again. Other nights, I would stay awake, and neither of us would reach the end. My mother stood on the edge of reality, bending and retreating. I could push her. She was a strong woman, but I learned that you can see a person clearly and let them retreat to their last safe haven. It's not for their sake, but for yours. I told her, "Mother, if you know anything, you can tell me now, later, or even ever, but I'll find out anyway." Her eyes were tearful and frightened, and for a moment I thought she was going to tell him. Then she pursed her lips and picked up the old manuscript. She said, "Your father knows best how to protect us. He always has." I stood up, straightened her dress, and was overcome with emotion. I didn't hate him. This was something no one had expected. I saw my mother choose fear over her child, and I didn't feel hatred. Instead, I felt sorrow for a woman who had decided long ago that surviving my father meant enduring the unbearable. She knew something. Now I was sure. He told me it was appropriate for me to speak frankly, even if she couldn't speak loudly. His name was Daniel Coleman, and he had been handling personal injury and accident cases for 30 years in a modest office above a hardware store. I chose him because he wasn't pretentious, and like my family, he listened to everything without looking. When I finished, he paused for a moment. Then he said, "You've done half the job. Most clients are emotionally affected, but you've brought me a witness and a missing document." Coleman explained what happened next in simple terms. He sent official letters to the victims, asking them to keep any records related to the incident so that nothing would be lost or kept secret, given the inquiries that were being made. He was going to help me review the emergency medical services list. Based on what I showed him, we were discussing whether there was enough evidence to ask the district to reconsider. He was careful in his words, making no promises, just saying he would. "Okay, see what the newspaper says," I told him. That made me believe him more. As I was leaving the office, I turned wrongly onto an industrial road on the south side of town, passing a low concrete block building with 2 open windows. Even before I saw the sign, the smell hit me. The smell of fresh paint, primer, motor oil, sharp tools, and chemicals wafted from the open parking lot. Ostrander Auto Body Shop. Dale Ostrander had been a friend of my father's 40 years. I hadn't noticed anything else that day, only the smell. My ability to recognize names would serve me well later. I rolled down the windows and continued home, stopping to ask my family to believe me. I was doing something they didn't need me to. The emergency medical services request list arrived Thursday in a thin, lightweight envelope, but it changed everything. A notarized copy, sealed and signed. I made myself a cup of coffee before opening it, knowing I wouldn't be able to read it afterward, and that I needed another minute before that. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, opened the pages, and read the paramedic's account of the night I lost control. His words were brief, concise, and deeply moving. The team had noted what they saw below the description of the scene before anyone could piece together the story. Paint marks on the driver's side door and the rear panel. A car of a different color than mine, a vehicle that was there before it overturned. Below, there's a note about the wreckage, the angle of impact, the internal curvature on the side, and how the metal bends when it hits something, as it veers off the road. Even the paramedic noticed it. I recommend checking another car. It was there, handwritten. I confirmed I was 2 years old. The second car. Its color wasn't mine. It hit the door next to where I was. I read it once. I read it a second time. I read it a third time. Slowly. Like you're pressing on it to make sure it's real, like a wound. My family told me I'd been confused for 2 years. They told me there hadn't been a truck. I wrote that I was hurting myself to get attention. The paramedics who pulled me out of that hole wrote that someone had punched and kicked me that night. I didn't answer the phone and I didn't break down. I sat very quietly with my hands on the table, and I only spoke once in the empty kitchen in a faint voice that was almost a whisper. I'm not claiming that. It was a truck. So I made a copy, saved the first copy in my files, and started looking for the paint job. When Coleman saw the list of victims, he acted quickly. A second car would change everything legally. it would turn my one unfortunate accident as a victim in a wheelchair into a hit and run. That was another file. The question was simple and terrifying at the same time. Whose car was this? I remembered Walt Whitfield's black pickup truck and its partial license plate. I remembered my father walking briskly and quietly toward my house, talking about contracts. And I remembered a concrete block building on the south side of town, smelling of fresh paint. Coleman knew how to ask questions I couldn't ask without telling anyone. Auto repair shops keep records. They have to keep records of parts, insurance, and taxes. This record allows the patient to track suppliers and insurance companies that the investigator can follow up with. It took the investigator 2 weeks of hard work, but 3 days after the accident, he returned with a receipt from the Ostrander Auto Repair Shop, a front left panel, a bumper, and a full paint job. The vehicle was a dark-colored pickup truck. Its registered owner was my brother, Nolan Merrill, and my father, Raymond Merrill, had paid the full amount that day. His name was listed in the Dale Ostrander records. I placed the receipt next to my travel diary, letting it fill in the gaps my family said they had forbidden me to look at for 2 years. A truck hit me. My brother was driving. 3 days later, my father paid for the dent his son had made in my back. Now I understand why the doors smelled open. They not only fixed the truck, but they repainted it. But they never once thought about my car. The car was completely wrecked and had been towed to a dumpster on the county line, where it sat for 2 years. The strange paint was still stuck to the driver's side door, in the exact spot where the paramedics had seen it. They'd forgotten they were waiting for my sample and had cleaned it off Nolan's car. Coleman told me what I already suspected, that the civil and criminal cases were separate tracks, and I could pursue either one. The civil route was my car. I could file a lawsuit. The criminal route belonged to the county, and I needed someone with a license plate to fix that. He made a phone call, and that's how I ended up at Detective Butt's office. She was a tired, polite, and demanding woman, but she was willing to investigate the crime scene in the small town. I listed them in order: registration details, paint transfer, the witness holding the partial license plate, the bread machine license plate receipt, and 3 days later my father paid in cash. Boot read the receipt twice without saying a word. Then she leaned back and said, "I'll tell you the truth. Causing a car accident and serious injury isn't a crime. This kind of thing takes longer than people realize. When a case is closed, new evidence might be enough to reopen it." I touched the document. "This is new evidence. It shouldn't have been removed from the file. You didn't promise me I'd go to jail. You didn't promise me anything." She said she would retrieve the first file to see who had worked on it and to find out how the second vehicle inspection checklist had been lost in a serious accident. But as I was about to leave, she said something else, as if speaking to herself. Someone had decided to bury me. I drove home, my hands in my pockets. For 2 years, my family had told me nothing was wrong. I'd given him ample time to meet with the detective. The silence was almost over,